Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Amir Albazi of Informing the Stasi. Jack Slack, it's the Jack Slack podcast. And oh boy, I reckon there'll be about 5,000 people in today listening to this one. It's just not a good card. No attempt to make it seem like a good card. This is the thing, like, there are still some people who are like, any card can be a banger, blah, blah, blah. And then there are people who have followed this sport for any length of time and know that you can tell what's going to be good and what's going to be bad 75-80% of the time from the matchups. Sometimes two terrible fighters will produce a good fight. Marcin Prachnio and whoever he fought the other day did. And he's a terrible fighter and has a history of putting on terrible fights, but he had a banger for some reason that one time. And there are ones where we get a matchup between two exciting, talented names, and you go, damn, there's no way that can be bad, and it turns out crap. But most of the time, what you see is what you get in MMA matchups. And you could literally go down this card and go, that looks like an interesting fight, and the rest of them look awful. So the good ones were Charles Jourdain versus Victor Henry. Everyone knew that would be a good fight because they're two good, interesting fighters. Yusuf Zalal versus Jack Shaw. Everyone knew that would be an interesting fight. Everything else largely sucked. Your main event was Brandon Moreno versus Amir Albazi. A lot of Moreno praise coming off this one, and I'm going to say, like, I love a bit of Brandon Moreno. I thought he looked good. It was good to see him having heavy bag practice, basically. But Amir Albazi has been off for a year with a spine injury, and I think he had a heart surgery as well. They put up x-rays of his spine, and people on the Reddit MMA were chiming in to go like, I'm an attending at so-and-so hospital. This looks bad. Basically, the dude fought like he had a fused spine, just stood there and took punches. And then when he did get a takedown, it was things like, you can see when someone's sharper, you can see when someone's technically slicker and a step ahead. But when he took Brandon Moreno down for the first time, and Brandon Moreno did the thing where he got up on his hands and started scooting backwards on his bum, the thing you do until he hit the fence, the thing Dustin Poirier does every single time he gets taken down. And Amir Albazi lost him before he got anywhere near the fence. Like Amir Albazi was on his knees and Brandon Moreno's legs just slipped free and he stood up. And that's not supposed to happen. What's supposed to happen is you follow them to the fence and then they use the fence to get up, and that's the technique. He was losing Brandon Moreno when Brandon Moreno was like, I'm going to do a bit of movement now. Just standing there getting punched. Never worked out that like the left hook was a problem. And the left hook, like, some of these punches that Brandon Moreno was throwing were like Todd Duffy, arm behind him to load up the left hook. But a lot of the time he was just opening his glove and slapping him. And that worked really well too. He'd go slap 1-2. Because if you go round with your left hand and then you go straight with your left hand, that messes with a lot of people, especially if they're using their arms and hands to block. Because you bring your right hand up to the outside and suddenly there's a jab coming down the center. Return of the Brandon Moreno step-up left kick too. Love that. He throws a 1-2 or a jab overhand, and then he steps up into a left kick to the leg. And then in the next round, he threw the 1-2, stepped up into a left kick to the head, and he clipped him straight through the guard and hurt Albazi a bit. That was the one he threw loads against Kai Kara-France. He was ending every combination with a step-up left kick to, I think it was the head. Or was it the body? No, he winded him to the body. So he's throwing it to the head, and he threw it to the body later and got him under the arm and winded him. And that was the finish, wasn't it? I can't remember. But yeah, it was one of those fights where Brandon Moreno looked good, but I think people were too amazed by how Brandon Moreno looked because they weren't noticing how bad Amir Albazi looked. Tough as nails to stay in there and take a pasting for 5 rounds, but still, it's a bit of a fall from grace to go where you were having not, everyone pretty much agrees that the decision was wrong in that Kai Kara-France fight, but it was competitive enough that he could confuse some bad judges. To this fight where there was like not a minute of the fight that you thought he was winning. If you made Amir Albazi highlights for this fight, it would be maybe the one takedown, and then you'd have to cut the clip really quickly at the end of him getting Moreno's bum on the floor before Moreno got away. Or you could include some of the clips of Brandon Moreno basically falling over his own feet. Because while people fetishize the flyweights in a really weird way, Brandon Moreno does love just throwing his head forward and then lunging in after it. He's kind of like Rob Whittaker in that way. It's about a 75-25 split between good stuff and just wild shit. But then I'm quite in favour of that. I think everyone should throw some wild stuff from time to time because it's kind of like Tekken. if you only use the moves with the best frame data, everyone knows what's coming. Sometimes you got to do a big backspring cartwheel. If you play Lily, which I do. Bit of news there, I switched from Paul to Lily on account of the really big side steps. So what else was on this card? I'm not going to spend the whole episode talking about this card. I'm going to get this out of the way and then I'm going to do some questions. But I did enjoy Yusuf Zalal versus Jack Shaw. Jack Shaw coming up from bantamweight a little while ago, sort of hampered by the fact that I said it on the preview, but he is Welsh GSP in the way that he's jab, inside low kick, double leg, nothing really on the feet that's like, and this was a problem with GSP too. If you remember the fight with Jake Shields, he tried throwing his right hand because he had Jake Shields standing in front of him on the feet. Tried throwing his right hand and it looked like he'd forgotten how to throw it. His elbow's coming up, his body's not connect. This guy who's got beautiful mechanics and everything else can't connect his body, his feet and his hips to his punch when he's throwing his right hand. It was very weird to watch. But Jack Shaw's a bit like that. He just doesn't sit down on anything, doesn't throw anything with pop. And Zalal actually can. The knees were the most important part of this fight, probably because Zalal was chucking them up just to stop Jack Shaw from level changing. And then you're left with a choice, because in the first round he threw a knee, and then he threw another one, and Jack Shaw didn't level change. But then Jack Shaw was stood upright, and Zalal just popped him with a good stepping jab. Because if the guy's going to duck a lot of the time, and you show some knees, it's not like he can duck with his hand in front of his chin and just palm your knee or whatever. He has to stop ducking. So immediately after that, you can throw a jab or something straight at him, land it, and then he either has to go like, oh, I better get back to moving my head and ducking, or he has to stand there and take punches. So it works really well. It's something that routinely comes up when we talk about Kazuki Osaki, one of the pound-for-pound best kickboxers in the world right now. Who was he fighting the other day? Oh, it was Jin Mandakoro. And I did a little post-fight article on this because Jin Mandakoro worked out what Toki Tamaru did and a couple of other guys have done. This guy is shorter than most of his opponents. He comes forward with a high guard, head in the chest, trying to pressure in and hit the body. If you keep throwing knees, you can dig him out of your sternum, basically. And Mandakoro was throwing these knees, and every time Osaki thought a knee was coming, he'd slide back and pull his head back, and then he'd try and come in after it. So Mandakoro would pick up the knee and then turn it over and kick down into a low kick. It was like a really big Brazilian kick. Brazilian kick where you raise the knee and then turn it over to throw the kick to the head. He's instead turning it over and kicking down on the leg. So it's a big movement that results in a big loss of power. It's not a thumping low kick, but it was a really clever little way to exploit Osaki stepping back and leaning every time he threw the knee or showed the knee. But Zalal just followed up with a nice jab. And then in the second round, Jack Shaw actually ducked onto the knee, and that was not great for him. I mean, he got knocked down and then he got arm triangled. Arm triangle is one of those finishes, like, in the same way that the rear naked choke doesn't really tell you how the fight went. You can go, rear naked choke, needs to work on his submission defense, when in fact most people who get hit with the rear naked choke, they've been like knocked down or gassed out. There's a load of stories that end up there because the rear naked choke is just like it's the end of a pathway of bad positions. And the arm triangle's a bit like that too. It's getting caught with your elbow away from your body and the guy sticks his head in the hole. And if he's a good top player and he's heavy, especially if you're hurt or tired, it's going to be a really hard time getting that arm back in. And then you're into like worst case scenario escapes, Yuri Prochazka style. So it's quite a common finish, not because everyone's setting up arm triangles, but because the elbow popping out and you jamming your head in it and keeping that space there as you move up their body is just a common occurrence when you put someone under pressure, when you're hitting them with elbows from the top, when they get hurt on the way down and they just want to grab you, so they throw their arm over your back. But I'm super happy for Zalal. He's on a 3-fight submission streak, I think it is now. Oh no, 4-fight submission streak, sorry. 3-fight submission streak in the UFC. This is a guy doing his second run right. It's like Julian Erosa. I think he's on his third UFC run. There are guys who struggle with like the top names and then they go out of the UFC and you go, oh, they are way better than regional talent. Get them back in the UFC. And Zalal's an obvious one of those. Pretty funny to bring up the Ilia Topuria fight for him. I think, most of us would, with how hot everyone is on Topuria right at this instant because of what he just did, I think most people would comfortably say that he murks Zalal. But Zalal's got better since their first fight. It's just that it seems like Ilia Topuria's got an awful lot better. Not unheard of, though, for people to just be difficult, specific matchups. Who was it? Oh, Dennis Hallman beat Matt Hughes by a cheeky submission very early on. Matt Hughes became the best fighter on the planet. The UFC said, get Dennis Hallman and he can avenge that loss, and Dennis Hallman beat him again by submission. And Dennis Hallman was not that good. I think Hughes rattled off like 20 wins between the two Hallman fights. And then after the second Hallman fight, he rattled off another 20 wins and became like a generational talent in the UFC. Charles Jourdain versus Victor Henry was a pleasure to watch. I loved this one. This came back to... There was a little bit of the stuff we were talking about with Max where I was saying volume strikers, and Victor Henry is very much a volume striker, they have to get going. They have to stick to you after you've thrown something. Every time you enter an exchange, they've got to get back with a couple. So first and third or leading to get on the counter, or just throw a punt, jab and dip and then throw a counter. That works really well against volume strikers because they have to push their advantages. They have to take risks. They have to try and tick their strike counter up. So I thought what Jourdain was doing well in this one was he was trying to cut off Henry's chances to extend the exchanges. So he's going like calf kick, circle out, jab, circle out, switch to southpaw body kick, circle out, flying knee, clinch up, circle out. He's really keeping those exchanges short. And then he throws a right straight and ducks and weaves into a big left hook and a right straight and chins Henry. And that's because in that instance, he was going like, I'm hanging around, quick, throw back. And then he cracked him while he was throwing back. So both those strategies work really well against volume strikers. The clinch stuff was fantastic in this one. The clinch is an area, it is grueling, so that's why it's not so used effectively, but you don't see enough really effective clinch striking and tripping from the clinch. The stuff you see in Muay Thai a lot, but these two were both throwing each other with trips. They were hammering each other with knees and uppercuts and hooks. There was a bit where Charles Jourdain grabbed a collar tie and Victor Henry had one arm free, and he was doing exactly what Josh Barnett did against Mir and Nelson, just uppercut hook, the Randy Couture type stuff too. But and they were just throwing each other by. Jourdain kept hitting the little sweep, maybe a Sasai Komiyashi, maybe just a little foot sweep. But the great thing about foot sweeps is sometimes it's feet to back. And that's beautiful because it's not a huge amount of effort and you've got like the best possible outcome. Matt Brown used to do it and he did it against Eric Silva. And he swept him, and he was straight past his guard because he fell down on top of him. And that's a great thing to happen, because if you shoot a double leg or a single leg, great chance you end up in the guy's guard or on his legs as he's trying to get up. You foot sweep someone straight to their back, you're on top of them, chest to chest. Or standing over them. If you want to keep standing, you can do that too. Fedor used to do that. He used to make sure he stayed standing so that he could punch down on the guy and throw his legs past. Or kick. But the other thing about foot sweeps is that it's an off balance. So if you attempt a foot sweep and the guy doesn't fall, he's going to do something so that he doesn't fall. He's going to move, he's going to step 1 foot wide, he's going to maybe have to put a hand down, bend forward at the waist, and that gives you chances to get on front headlocks, chokes. Jourdain was looking for the front headlock and the guillotine constantly through this fight. Henry, he hit a sweep in was it the second round? He hit a foot sweep and he threw Jourdain onto his hands and knees and just went straight to Jourdain's back. It was great. Jourdain was constantly looking for the guillotine, and he was trying to do sit-up stuff from the guard too. He's got a really good way of getting guys to like push into him. And he even attempted a hip bump sweep in this one, and someone sent a question, be like, what do you think about a second Dan black belt in jiu-jitsu almost getting hip bump sweeped? Hip bump sweep, legit. You won't see a whole lot of like Carlos Newton versus Matt Hughes. Man, I'm dunking on Matt Hughes today inadvertently. But Carlos Newton versus Matt Hughes, sweep him all the way over, hip bump sweep. But what it is it's like it's like anything in, it's like the right low kick in Muay Thai or kickboxing. If you don't do anything about it, it's really going to mess your day up. You probably are going to do something about it, but then the other guy can build. So if you watch Ryan Hall's fights in the UFC, when he ends up on the bottom, he sits up for the hip bump sweep, opens his legs, the guy pushes him back down, and when they push him back down, a lot of the time their hips come up off their heels, and he scoops under the leg and starts working like K-guard, inverting on the leg, inverting on the arm. Andrew Wiltsey was really good at doing this in grappling competition. Guys would get into closed guard with him, particularly in no-gi, and they'd put their hands in his armpits and push him away. And he'd do Mike Tyson pendulum head movement stuff. He'd go side to side, and that not only messes up their structure, but also can hurt their fingers if they've got if they're doing web of the hand, thumbs in the armpits, you can jam up their fingers and wrists doing that. But he goes side to side, and then he just sit up on one side explosively. And he could get a really good attempt at the hip bump sweep and then try a triangle or whatever off it. BJ Penn used to do a thing where he'd put his forearm across the guy's neck and sit up on one hand, but keep his guard locked. And he talked about it in his book. What's it called? Like the Mixed Martial Arts Book of Knowledge or something like that. And he also did a book on the closed guard, actually, for jiu-jitsu. But he does a lot of sitting up on one hand without opening the legs to attempt the hip bump sweep. It was kind of like a fake where it was very obviously fake, because he'd be up on his hand and you'd be going, but you're not opening your legs. You need to open your legs to hip bump. But he could do all kinds of cool stuff from there against Matt Hughes. Man, I am dunking on Matt Hughes today. But against Matt Hughes in their second fight, he sits up into him. So he's sort of bisected Matt Hughes' body by putting his forearm across his neck and sitting up. Matt Hughes throws the hand that is nearest to Penn at Penn's head. Penn ducks under it and goes to his back. Bit of octopus guard play before that was even a cool thing. So sit-up guard legit, but sit-up guard particularly when combined with the ability to get up. Because in jiu-jitsu competition, the guy's probably not standing up when he tries to hip bump you. So you can just sort of like sit on his hips, try and keep him down. But in MMA, if the guy's up on a hand and you're not pushing him down, he's getting up. So there's this bit where Jourdain, I believe he did get up, and then Victor Henry pushed in and got guillotined. Because they got up to the feet first, and then he got the power guillotine, the Buddha fist guillotine, and went back down to the mat. But I did a film room on Linton Vassell. It's no point me advertising it here because even fewer people are going to watch this episode of the podcast than the Linton Vassell film room. But I was talking about his reverse butterfly sweep, and that linked in with Ricardo Lamas's get the fuck up guard. Because Ricardo Lamas would open his guard, sit up on one hand, put the knee right across the opponent's belly, and he'd have his hand over the back of their neck, just draped over their neck, and he'd threaten to stand up, and they'd push in. And when they pushed in, he could lean back and try and sweep them with the one butterfly hook, or he could grab the neck. So there's sequences in the Bektik fight and the Darren Elkins fight where he's got them he lifts them up with the butterfly hook into a headstand, and they're going, oh no, I've got my balance, and then he snaps on the guillotine and just lets them drop on their belly. If you haven't seen the Charles Oliveira fight, Charles Oliveira was always a really good grappler, but he takes down Ricardo Lamas, and Ricardo Lamas rolls through with his single butterfly hook sweep into a guillotine and finishes him. And I think I was slagging off the guillotine from closed guard the other day because who was it trying it over and over again? Oh, maybe it was Grasso against Shevchenko. Yes, it was Grasso against Shevchenko, just staying on her back and then trying to set up for guillotines from closed guard. And it's like, if you're not threatening to get up, they're not going to put their head out. They're not going to come out of the turtle. They're just going to sit on your hips. Setting up guillotines from the closed guard without a vertical up and down threat just doesn't work. Because half the time the goal is to get your chest and head above theirs, which is what you do when you stand up. But anyway, what else on this card wasn't trash? Ayman Zahabi versus Pedro Munhoz. That was a nice little boxing-centric fight. I did like when Pedro Munhoz got a back body lock on Zahabi, and Zahabi put a hand down as if to roll into a Granby. Pedro Munhoz opened his hands and put one of his hands down to the mat, and then Zahabi just stood up and peeled his hands off. Because half the job of getting away from a back body lock is peeling the guy's hands apart, and that's hard. I think I said Corey Sandhagen, weirdly enough, is the best guy in MMA at that right now, it seems. But that's where guys get stuck. They just get mat returned a dozen times because you can't unlock the hands. But Zahabi faked as if to roll, and Munhoz was like, uh-oh, put a hand down, and Zahabi was out. It was beautiful. Good dipping jab. Some nice high guard stuff in here, some good counter punches. Munhoz looked old, but Zahabi's pretty old. He's 36 in one of these lighter weight divisions. And he's had a really weird career because he's been fighting for as an amateur, he's been fighting for 14 years. As in he started amateur competition 14 years ago. 2 years later, he started as a pro. But he's been fighting 14 years, and he's had 16 total fights if you include those amateur ones. Averaging one fight a year going back 15 years. It's just wild. But he looks pretty fresh. He doesn't look like he's taken a heap of damage. I expect that they're probably sparring quite sensible up at TriStar. But the curse of the very old prospect is that at some point, you've got to get momentum to get a title shot. And that involves fighting more than once a year. Or you just become this guy who's tricky and people don't really want to fight, who's got a great winning streak, but you just keep fighting until you lose, because at some point you will. Leo Santos, great example of that. And then you're a 40-year-old dude with no momentum, fighting on undercards. Mike Malott, Trevin Giles. I had high hopes for this one because Trevin Giles sometimes does interesting stuff, and Mike Malott was fighting in front of a home crowd, and it was dreadful. Some of these guys turn up when they're in front of a home crowd, like Mark Jacasey, when they put him on London cards, and he was like, fuck every single one of you. He'd just turn up in his knee sleeves and wrestle incredibly boringly. And the people would boo, and he'd go, I'm sorry, I'm not giving up half my paycheck to swang and bang. Anything else good on there? Someone was asking about Jasmine Judavicius and her devastating ground and pound, and then I watched it and I assumed that they were joking because she's just like pity-pattering Lipsky in the head from Mounted Crucifix. I liked her first takedown, which was get kicked in the face and then scoop under it with both arms. Like, why can't I hold all these limes? And then just run forwards. Co-main Rose Namajunas, standard Rose Namajunas story. She's just not got it. She does not have the juice. She had it, she lost it, it's gone. It's sometimes surprising because you see people like her talent was substantial and you'd go, wow, she's going to be around for a long time. I just can't see the division getting better. And the division hasn't really gotten better. And I mean, we're in a different division now, but like women's MMA has not gotten better. She's just lost it. But that's fighting. Sometimes it's harder to be like a good top-level fighter for 10 years than it is to be the best in the world for 3. Right, dreadful card. If you're still here, let's answer some questions because at least we'll get to talk about some fun stuff. William from Open Note Grappling says, talk about the 2024 Wrestling World Championships. That's what I'm doing. I've not seen it yet. I'll wait for Earn Your Gold Medal to post some cool techers from it. I did see that the seeding was all weird. They've got like 2 of the best guys in the world meeting in the first round. Polite Vulture says, what fighter has the dreamiest eyes? I always think Gerald Meerschatz's eyes are weird. Maybe off-putting isn't the best dream. Maybe that's not dreamy to you, but it's fairly dreamy to me. Samuel asks, how do you reckon Fluffy versus Kamzat fight goes down a few years down? That's a good fight. That's a good fight. I mean, Fluffy's thing has been falling apart in the early going, and Kamzat can crack people in the early going. He's not so much of a standing threat as fights go on, you'll notice. I mean, he dropped Gilbert with a jab because Gilbert just gets tired and starts fighting with his mouth open. But, that Usman fight, he was not looking so hot in the later going. But it's getting to the later going. In those heavier divisions, though, the guys with cardio have a unique weapon, especially someone like Fluffy who just works constantly. But getting through that first and early second round onslaught is half the challenge, or is the entire challenge of fighting Kamzat Chimaev. I do think more people need to look at Rob's success escaping the back and not get stuck wrestling up against the fence. My working theory now is that when someone has the single hook, the crossbody ride along the fence, you should just cover that knee, fall on it towards the center of the cage, and give them back control with one hook in and start fighting up from there because there's a good chance you end up on top. It's hard to choke people from the back if they're on their back and they've got both hands working. It's easier to choke people or get your hand around their jaw and smash their teeth in when they've got their hands on the mat and they're trying to wrestle up. Fluffy versus Brendan Allen was an interesting fight where they just scrambled around on the floor for a while and the cage did not really matter that much. I think anyone who can take Kamzat into more of a scrambly fight like that, or a grappling-y fight rather than a fence wrestling fight, has a much better chance. SS7 says, is it me or is this a bit of a lull for MMA, at least from a recent historical perspective? No, it's not you, fam. It is absolutely a lull. Someone said bold predictions for 2025, and I started right, and then I felt sad about it, but product's going to keep getting worse or stay the same. Profits will somehow go up. I think we're in what the WWE had for many years, when they had Triple H and Stephanie as like on-screen talents, and they were pushing Roman Reigns to high heaven, and no one really cared. And people tuned in the only people who knew how bad it was were the people tuning in every week, and they'd talk about it all the time. But somehow, for fewer viewers, WWE was making more and more money, and that's what it feels like with the UFC at the moment. Unless ESPN cut them and no one wants to give them the same money, but with Netflix doing Tyson versus Jake Paul, I think there's a risk that Netflix gets it. But then a lot of us pay for Netflix already, so paying for one less service would be great. Because God knows a lot of people don't watch ESPN Plus for anything else. But I do think the money thing is often involved in why this sport is suffering at the moment, because things were getting better and better and better, and now we're at a point where it's like, there's still no reason to attract good athletes. The reason that the lighter weight classes are generally better is not because there aren't heavier people who could fight. There are heavier people who could fight and have gas tanks and stuff, and they're off doing sports that pay actual money. There is no call for I was going to say 145-pound man, but a man who can cut to 145 pounds in American football or basketball. Maybe as a jockey, but there's not so many jobs doing that. But that's the UFC's business model. Now we're trying to get as many people in for as little money as possible, and we don't want the fan base to care about who's fighting. We want to care that there are fights on. Which is interesting because you're seeing sort of a backfire to that with the importance of Alex Pereira. The fact that the UFC is constantly having to go, oh my God, get me Pereira, tells you that people will tune in for Alex Pereira in ways that they won't for others. So despite Alex Pereira, I don't think he did it on his own because the UFC did give him some matchups to sort of set that all up. And certainly giving him Khalil Roundtree instead of someone who actually deserved a title shot. But they have inadvertently made him a star, or at least he's sort of slipped through the cracks of the UFC trying not to make stars anymore. MMA Rax says, what's the criteria for bout order? For what possible reason was Machado Rivera, God, I didn't even talk about that, but one of the worst fights I've ever seen, on the main card over a fight such as Jourdain Henry? Did the UFC just assume a sloppy fight between diet heavyweights would end in a finish? I've no idea. A lot of the time they do go, oh, heavyweights, there you go. But I noticed that Derek Lewis, who called in sick to this card because he wasn't feeling Alberta, I don't actually know what's wrong with him. I'm not going to joke about that too much because he might be properly ill or something. But Derek Lewis was on this card, but he's headlined stuff for them for a long time because he's a little bit of a star, inadvertently, because of the balls was hot thing. And they put him in the third fight down, and I was going, what on earth? And he may have agreed because he pulled out of his fight at the last minute. But yeah, it was very weird. They didn't even headline with a Canadian. Maybe they had Mike Malott in there. God, how few good Canadians are there in MMA now? But just the other day, oh no, sorry, it's on the next pay-per-view, isn't it? We got Chris Weidman versus Eric Anders. Two absolutely washed fighters who have not had good fights in a very long time on the main card as the curtain jerker for the main card. So they used to try and do a prelim main event or whatever because you want something good leading into the pay-per-view so that people buy the pay-per-view. Always remember Glory Last Man Standing, the one I always say no one bought, but they had Crocop fight Big Baby Miller to lead into that. And they had a terrible fight. And I was like, well, if anyone was going to buy it before and then they watched that fight, they're not going to buy it now. So no, there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason, but Mick Maynard will still pretend that there is. The Mick Maynard tweet is getting so much play at the moment. The one where he's like, you're telling me these aren't great fights? Tell me which events this year has been bad. And he tweeted it at the end of last year. And it's been non-stop bad events all year. There's been about 3-4 good, consistently good cards. There can be good fights on any card because if you get enough fighters together, one of them will accidentally fluke into a good fight. Or there'll just be gems like Henry Jourdain. Really good fight. Some reason, just hidden halfway through the prelims on this one. But consistently, the events this year have been not great. Fights Today says, what is it about Alberta that they always get the bad cards? Hold on. Okay, I pulled up five of the 7 events. Let's have a look. The 5 most recent ones. So there was this one, which was a turd. There was UFC 240. I'm surprised they spent actual pay-per-views up there. But they had Holloway versus Edgar, which is names, but was not a particularly great fight. They had Chris Cyborg versus Felicia Spencer in the co-main. Okay. Jeff Neal, Nico Price. I think Nico was already washed by that point. Sarukian versus Oben Mercier. The one slow Sarukian fight. Jotko versus Marc-Andre Barriault. Split decision. Vivian Araujo, Alexa Davis. Hakeem Duodo. Where's Hakeem Duodo? He's Canadian, isn't he? Needed him on the prelims of this, doing 2 or 3 cool kicks in a 15-minute fight and then dropping the split. Whoa, hold on. UFC 240. God, how long ago was that? 2019, because we had Devison Figueiredo versus Alexandra Pantoja on the prelims, which was a good fight. And you had Gillian Robertson on the Fight Pass prelims. She genuinely is the best Canadian fighter today. And she's the number 15th woman in her division. No shade on Gillian. She's a legend. But she was too good for the UFC to waste on this card. Then it was Alvarez Poirier 2, which is a banger. Jose Aldo, Jeremy Stevens, banger. Ioanni and Jacek, Tisha Torres. Or Alexander Hernandez, Olivia Oben Mercier. Do you know what? These events probably got better when Olivia Oben Mercier went to PFL. I'm glad he made his $1 million. he was not the most entertaining fighter in the world. Jordan Mean on that card. Makachev versus Kajan Johnson. Yeah, man, these cards suck. Nunes Shevchenko 2. Oh, that was a stinker. But at least you had the karate hottie Henry Cejudo debut. Not his fight debut, the debut of karate hottie, because he comes out against Wilson Hayes in the long stance, having trained with the Pitbull brothers, and he slaps the piss out of Wilson Hayes. But otherwise, that card was dreadful as well. Oh, Ricky Glenn put a hellacious beating on Gavin Tucker. Where's Gavin Tucker? He should have been on this card. Andy Hickey says, what's the ceiling for Zalal? He looked incredible. I think higher than I thought it was originally. I think there's also some part Jack Shaw not being big enough for this weight class and also just being in a sort of decline of his own, trying to work out who he is or what's missing. I mean, he's had a couple of fights at featherweight now, so I can't blame that entirely on that. But it's a name. It's not one of the top names, but it's a name. So I presume we'll get someone maybe even ranked for the next one, which would be very interesting because the featherweight rankings, for as much as the featherweight division produces like the best of the best as the champions, the featherweight rankings are always a mess. It's like Brian Ortega's in there because he fights once every 4 years and he managed to pull off a win this time. Josie Aldo asks about thoughts on the outcome of Kung Lee's lawsuit and its impact on the future of the UFC's product. From what I saw, isn't it just a financial settlement for the fighters involved? Hang on, is that Kung Lee's or is there's another one going through as well? I'm not entirely up to date on the outcome of the lawsuit, but I believe they didn't get anything written into future contracts or anything like that. And I think a lot of fighters might even look at this and go, well, I'll just wait until 20 years after I'm retired for another lawsuit to come through, and then I'll get paid at what I was due during this actual career. But I do need to look into that. Nash does good work on that. I think Paul Gift's been covering it a bit too. Really, Uncrowned and people like that should be doing lots of work on this stuff, and I've just not been seeing it on my feed, at least. And you'll never see Dana asked about it, or any of the guys who Dana didn't even turn up to this card. That's how little he cares. He will turn up for Power Slap, and he won't turn up for Canada. Low-key still annoyed at GSP. Pavka asks, any good books on the old catch and pro wrestling days? Who would you ask? Probably someone like Jonathan Snowden is a good one for that. But I really enjoyed Billy Robinson's memoir. I think it was called Physical Chess. Some lovely anecdotes in that about sort of Wigan catch wrestling times. And pro wrestling. He was a pro wrestler as well. Scientific Wrestling's done a couple of books, actually. Jake Shannon over there. Good lad. Preserving the history of catch wrestling. I was reading a book a while ago. I think it was just called The Wrestlers. And it was about sort of traditional wrestling styles around the world. Which, if it weren't already a book, that's a great idea for a book. You can still find Farmer Burns' books online. You can still find Frank Gotch's books online. But they're more like training books and also like the viewpoint of someone who was involved. You can find Hackenschmidt's books online. But you're probably looking for more sports writers' books on that sort of period, which I'm not super familiar with, if I'm honest. Ben asks, if I gave you a time machine with one charge, what is one pre-modern, brackets never captured on film or any other media, fight you'd go back and watch? This came up really interestingly because George Hackenschmidt, there was no footage of him wrestling. He was this incredible, was he Estonian? Lithuanian? If I remember from the kickboxing comments on YouTube, those regions, they get very mad if you get the wrong one. So hold on. Yes, he was Estonian. There we go. But they called him the Russian Lion because it was all like, yeah, over there. But he was an amazing strongman, incredible feats of strength attributed to him. And then he went into wrestling and he did really well there. But it was assumed that there was no footage of him. He had this great match with Frank Gotch, where Gotch punched him in the nose, apparently, during a clinch. But footage of a match from 1908 was discovered this week or last week. And it was all over Twitter. And stuff like that is so exciting for me. Because I'm not expecting to watch it and be like, well, this guy is a better technician than whoever. But you will, it's a bit of history and you get to see how those people moved. And it's like the boxing. Sometimes you watch old boxing and you go, Jesus, there's a lot of holes there. This is very messy stuff. And sometimes you watch like well-restored footage of old-timey boxers from 100 years ago, like Benny Leonard. If you watch Benny Leonard footage, you could be watching like a really good fighter today. Or Barney Ross. But yes, if I could watch any fight, God. Oh. There's a lot. I've always wanted to see Kid McCoy fight. I'd want to see one of his really dirty ones. Maybe Fritzy Zivic or someone like that. Another very dirty fighter. I could go back and watch original Jack Slack versus Jack Broughton. Because a £10,000, and that was an insane amount of money at the time. One of the reasons boxing fell out of favour was because Broughton was like the unbeatable champion. The familiar story in boxing, Broughton was the unbeatable champion, so he hadn't fought anyone in 4 years. So he goes into this fight, and his backer, I think it was the Duke of, I can't remember which Duke it was, sorry, but a Duke backs him for £10,000 in a side bet. £10,000 in those days is like hundreds of thousands of pounds today, which I believe is billions of dollars. And Broughton loses because he's old. And because this Duke lost £10,000 on him, it was like, right, we're outlawing boxing and we're cracking down on it. Even though it's technically outlawed already, but I'd quite like to see that one and maybe chip in a little bit on the bet. But the reason I brought up the Hackenschmidt one was because there's the one that everyone wants to see is Harry Greb. And I think I've mentioned Harry Greb a couple of times on the podcast before, but he was a middleweight. He came up the other day on Twitter because he fought 45 fights in 1 year at one point and won every one against no names, which is even crazier. He fought like every weekend. He was the middleweight champion of the world. He beat up Gene Tunney, who became the heavyweight champion of the world later on. He sparred with Jack Dempsey and allegedly gave Dempsey a licking despite being 2 weight classes lower. And Jack Dempsey, as the heavyweight champion of the world, said to reporters afterwards, it was like being in a glove factory and all the gloves were tumbling off the shelf onto me. And he was just supposed to be this incredible, high pace, constant punching, incredible volume fighter. There are some clips of him shadow boxing at thin air, and he's throwing like overhand lefts off his lead side and stuff. Really weird technique, but there's no footage of him actually fighting. And he was supposed to be brutal. He made Gene Tunney bite his own tongue in half, I think it was. And he's such a character too. He would make sure that he was seen getting drunk with hookers by journalists a couple of nights before a big fight, put a large bet on himself at better odds and win. And then when he retired, they found out that he had a glass eye the entire time. And then the commission, the New York commission particularly, came down like a ton of bricks on pre-fight medicals and vision. So the reason that Customato never fought when his brother did was that he couldn't get a license because he was blind in one eye. And it was because of the fallout of the Harry Greb stuff. But yes, all that is to say, I would love to watch Harry Greb just run wild on some unsuspecting middleweight or light heavyweight. And because that Hackenschmidt footage was found, and we know that Greb was at fights that were filmed or was in fights that were in front of cameras, perhaps filming something else, but he was at events that were filmed. We've just never seen the film. There is still the faint hope that someday we will see him fighting. There's a couple of grappling matches, actually, that I was trying to find a few weeks ago that just don't exist anymore. Eddie Bravo obviously got famous for beating Royler Gracie when Royler Gracie was the 3-time Abu Dhabi champion. And Eddie beat him and then went on to lose like the biggest points margin ever to Leo Vieira in the next round. But the more impressive thing in a lot of people's eyes was that Eddie Bravo submitted the world champion of that year, the guy who won the Worlds in Jiu-Jitsu, with, I think he got him with the twister, or maybe he twisted and then gave it up and went to the back and choked him and almost got disqualified for the twister. But Gustavo Dantas he beat. And you can't find that anywhere. But then with the Linton Vassell stuff I was doing this week, I've realised that most of Bellator is lost media now. Can't find any of their old events. They used to be on their website, and then PFL just scrubbed their website. Jack asks, what in your opinion would be the blueprint for MMA ground control? Flattened half has gotten way more play in recent years. However, I'm wondering more and more how the meta plays out adapting to this. Flattened half is always going to be money because it's it's a good hitting position and it's an awesome passing position and it's an awesome control position because you're sitting on their leg. So you can keep them on the mat, beating them up with short elbows, and then the moment you want to pass to mount or something like that, you can. It's also, the wonderful thing about half generally is that most people want their half back. So it's like an agreement. If you take someone down and they want their half guard back, you go, you can have your half guard back. And then you play from half guard, both of you. So it's and by getting the half guard, they're often stuck on the floor. So top half is really powerful, and it's the out in the open. It's very important. Against the fence is quite important, but because of depending on which way you're oriented. Crossbody ride, the single hook in, seems to be becoming a very big thing, because that is the guy's up to his knees, which happens all the time out in the open and along the fence, but you've got a good level of control on him. He's not just going to jump up, and if he does jump up, he opens himself up to you jumping on his back, to you mat returning him, all sorts of other stuff. You're only a small movement away from the choke. You're able to hold the wrist and keep punching him. So the crossbody ride, I think, is going to be really bigger than it already is. I mean, Ben Askren was doing it a little while ago. Obviously, Khamzat's doing it now. Fluffy's doing it now. And they're two very different fighters, Fluffy and Khamzat, but they both make use of that same control. I'd be interested to see more guys investing in what Craig Jones has been doing with his power ride stuff. Because chest-to-chest pins like upper body, side control and north-south, not so hot in MMA because everyone is so focused on rolling to their knees and getting up. Because there's a calculated risk. You go, yeah, I'll give up my back. In jiu-jitsu, people don't want to do that because it can go wrong and you can get choked or you can get stuck with the guy on your back. In MMA, the risk of being stuck on the bottom getting punched is much worse. And of course, you just can't win a round on the bottom. You've got to get up and make stuff happen. But Craig Jones a while ago did a DVD called Power Ride. And it played on some stuff that people have done before. It's more his exploration of these positions. It's not like him claiming he invented anything, but passing the guard and then walking back towards the legs, crossing the guy's legs over each other, sitting on his legs, pinching them together and sitting on them. All these positions where it's almost like you're going back towards the guard, but you've done it in such a way that you're just sort of like sitting on their legs. There's been a few examples in MMA before this, like Nick Diaz against Frank Shamrock. He walks him back towards the leg drag and kneels on his leg and punches him a few times. Fedor did it to Heath Herring for a bit. But nowadays we're seeing that you can sort of like prolong those positions and hold them rather than just turning the guy away and landing a couple of punches as he scrambles back into a guard or something. But I think controlling the legs, generally, we worked it out the Iranians worked it out with the Turk years and years ago, or the Turkish worked it out with the Turk. The Ottomans turned up to an early Olympics and started Turking everybody, so it was called the Turk. But yeah, people worked that out years ago in wrestling. You can use your leg to pull on their leg and hold them down that way. Sitting on legs is key, I'd say. Sadman says, thoughts on shoulder checks in combat sports? Don't really see a lot of them, but I went to a Muay Thai seminar a few months back where Namsak Noi showed something like a shoulder bump to push someone back and land a kick. I love using the shoulders generally. If you can't remember where I saw this, but someone was talking about it, but push a heavy bag so it's on a swing, so it starts swinging backwards and forwards, and then just step forward. You don't even need to jut your shoulder out. Just step forward so that it falls on your shoulder, and feel how much force it connects with on your shoulder and how it doesn't really affect you at all. If you're punching, if you thrust out a jab, and even if you get it so that your jab is locked out perfect. Your whole skeleton's built a structure just for the instant that the opponent steps onto it. There's still a good chance that your arm is going to buckle under the force of the guy moving onto you. The fewer links you have in a kinetic chain, the more it is you just use stepping your weight into something. So elbows, it's a lot easier to get some stank on an elbow than it is on a right straight, because it's a less complicated movement. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying landing it is easier than a right straight. I'm saying that if you stand someone in front of a bag and you teach them to throw a right hand and then you teach them to throw a right elbow, they're probably going to get decent enough power on the right elbow that even on day one you would be like, I don't really want to stand there and take that. And shoulder bumps are like that. It's very easy to learn how to get some power in a shoulder bump. If you watch some of I know we all hate Mario Batista because of the Aldo fight, but he's doing great work with shoulder bumps. And some of the shoulder bumps where you get a good clinch and you drop your weight, so you just bend your legs and drop down a bit and then jump up with the shoulder, get so much force behind that. And it's an unpadded surface going straight into the opponent's nose or chin. And the great thing about the shoulder bump is it can be used two ways in the clinch. It can be used to smash someone in the nose, or it can be used ineffectively, pumped 3 or 4 times. But in the course of doing that, you've moved the guy a little bit so you can dig an underhook, which is what's great about watching Mario Batista. Any fight except the Aldo one is that he goes between smashing people with the shoulder strike and then just bumping them to get a better position in the clinch. If you watch Henry Armstrong, who is an old fighter that we do have footage of, in fact, we have footage of him beating up Barney Ross, who I said is brilliant. He puts his shoulder in the middle of the opponent's chest. He puts his left shoulder in the middle of the opponent's chest with his body bladed, like he's in a sort of little shoulder roll. Keeps his chin down behind his shoulder, and he just keeps pushing the guy with his shoulder and physically pushing him backwards across the ring. And every time there's a little gap, he hits him with the right hand. Just turns his hips over and whips the right hand in. Uppercut, hook. I think he called it the blackout punch, his right hook, once he bumped them with the shoulder. But Henry Armstrong's game back in the day, they would not let you do it now. But the way that he fought back in the day was all lead shoulder and then punches off it. He wasn't smashing people in the face with his lead shoulder, at least not conspicuously all the time. Most of the time it was shoulder into the chest, and it was just him pushing. Because if you, like, an over-under clinch where you take your under out and just, so imagine you're in an over-under clinch, remove the underhook and just put it across in front of yourself like in a shoulder roll position. Then you're basically just bumping them with the shoulder. Which is actually like a great Greco technique from back in the day. They used to start from locked up. You'd both have an over-under and you'd lock your hands in an S grip. And one of the ways that you like ratchet it up and get a better position was you'd remove your underhook, swing it in front of their body, and then use your shoulder to push them back, lift them up out of their stance, and then you'd re-grab the over-under. Which still works. I do that in the clinch all the time. Rio says, which is the more powerful get-up? 1, half guard with the underhook, where you reap the knee, then get the underhook, and get under the opponent's butt. I think that's like the Lucas Lech style guard, but we'll just call it underhook get-ups for a moment. Reverse Z guard when you have the butterfly hook on the wrong side, the Ricardo Lamas get the fuck up guard, or overhook butterfly guard to push off and make space. I think overhook butterfly guard probably the least powerful for getting up. Getting up with an overhook is always a bit sketchy because they're in on your hips already or on your waist, but it still works. It's like you can't write off positions and go they don't work. This is the most annoying thing in the world. Someone replied to one of my Linton Vassal shorts going like, the guy on top's doing bad jiu-jitsu. He should be doing this. And it's Ryan Bader doing the guard pass that he did to Little Nog like 8 times. It's like, no, it's not boxing where we've decided everyone does it one way. You can't just be like, that's bad jiu-jitsu when you don't like what the guy does. And when it opens him up to specific counters, because every move opens you up to specific counters. But typically, underhooks are easier to understand than overhooks. But Volkanovski got up against Makachev with an overhook. I've seen the Ruotolos do awesome things with the overhook from half guard, like getting their legs out and just rolling through. Overhooks are very powerful if you can use them. So yeah, I would say it's probably maybe the most difficult one to learn to do well. Anything with an overhook. But if it's overhook butterfly, you're probably more interested in threatening sweeps or removing the overhook and putting your frame back in with your arm. Reverse Z, tricky because you do sort of like the way that you throw your arm over their back can open you up to arm triangles. I've seen guys get caught there a fair bit. Half guard underhook is always going to be the most basic, powerful one, but I've also seen it go wrong. Like if you watch Renan Ferreira versus Francis Ngannou from the other weekend, he gets his underhook, he gets to his hand, Francis Ngannou goes whizzer all the way through to the floor, and then he grabs the hand that Ferreira's getting up on, and he goes, no, and pulls it out. And then Ferreira's stuck on his side getting elbowed, or punched, I think it was, because it's PFL. But it's about understanding like the working parts. The underhook get up works really well because you're keeping the opponent's weight off you, you're in good structure and stuff. But if you can access your bottom hand, you're still in trouble because you've got to get up on it. Which is one of the reasons I like the cross wrist get up from Z guard so much, because you're further away from the opponent. If you watch the Jourdain Henry fight, actually, Henry, when Jourdain gets up on one hand, Henry tries to grab it in sort of like the Dagestani handcuff around the back, which is very common because that's what people do in MMA. But you'll notice guys in MMA now, they're getting up on the hand and they're putting it as far away from them as possible. So where they would be like straight upright with the hand next to their body before, now they're putting it way back there because they know the guy's going to reach through and try and grab it. But I think the case is that you've got to know all of them. But what I really like, go watch the Linton Vassal study because I really like how he uses the overhook. He keeps guys down on him in like this overhook position. And then he releases the overhook, goes in front of the face and gets the cross wrist. And then he gets up from there. And it's like the pop-off fight. He just got up 100 times. He got taken down again, but he got up 100 times. And getting up's it's not the hard part, but it's the start of the hard part. James asks, who was the first person to talk about weight transitions in striking? Is the term weight transition trademarked like weight transition TM? Is there a standard of film study that all film study nerds base their opinions on, or is it mostly subjective? Oh man, that's 2 questions. Weight transfer, I think It's interesting because I've read lots of like old martial arts books from like the 20s and actually even before that, the Bubishi is hundreds of years old, and that says a tiger brings down its prey with its weight, not its claws. But in boxing, I think Jack Dempsey's book Championship Fighting was a bit of a revolution in that way. I've read older boxing texts where they talk about like getting your whole body into punches and stuff, and punching with weight rather than punching with your arms, because even back then people knew not to punch with their arms. Except Gene Tunney, who was like, I punch with my arms because it's tighter and I don't want to hit hard. But I think Dempsey was the first one to really articulate how to get the body in motion, and he was like obviously he didn't care in his fighting career, he was just going for it. But once he wrote this book, I don't know if he ghostwrote it with someone or whatever, but he lays out this idea of punching purity. And he's like, there are impure punches and there are pure punches, and pure punches have body weight behind them. And when you start to think about it like that, that's really like Dempsey stuff. That's people didn't really care that much before, I don't think, in the books that I read at least. Is there a standard of film study or all fighting? Yeah, film study is just one person looking at a film. And I always say this, like, I know what I see in fights has changed, and it will always change. I was having a little laugh at some snooty guy on Twitter just projecting stuff onto this fight that wasn't there. But what you see will always reflect on what you're into at that time. I go back and watch fights now, and my wrestling and my get-ups have gotten so much better over recent years that I go back to old fights, and where previously I don't think I'd even cared about those things a lot, to be honest. I'm now looking at them going, damn, he's setting up a really nice get-up there. Or you'll start seeing openings for things. You go, oh, if only Randy Couture had known about this get-up then. Or if only Pedro Hizzo had known about stopping that get-up then. Stuff like that. But you're seeing things through your filter, which is your lived experience. No, your like martial arts experience, what you've seen, what you take in. It's kind of like in the gym. Sometimes you get so good with something that you just have to say, right, I'm not going to do that now. I'm hitting on all my training partners and they're not working it out. I'm going to try some other stuff so that I don't just stagnate and everything becomes about that. And I think it could be easy to do that with film study. Once you start thinking that you know everything, you're never going to pick up on new, especially if new things start to develop. And I'm not saying new like there's nothing new under the sun, but things do move in trends. Guys work things out, guys learn things from old film, and everyone starts using it. And if you think that you've got it worked out, you're going to miss those trends start to build until it's there and really obvious, and you're going, oh yeah, everyone's talking about this now. I need to start talking about this. Pavka asks, why did double collar tie knees disappear somewhat? Even Anderson, Vanderlei, and Shogun had ditched them. It's a position. It's a really strong position, but it's a position you've got to get. And as soon as you've got it, and if you're famous for it, the guy's going to go, right, I'm in trouble. It's not like the old days where you could just throw hooks and grab it, like Vanderlei Silva. Sometimes you can. Sometimes you can do that. But when you do that, eventually guys will build up a recognition that you're doing that. But it's still good in clinches. I mean, Demetrius Johnson was still using double collar ties to turn his back off the fence and land knees. He's probably the one to watch. There was someone else doing it the other day that I really liked. And I remember because I mentioned Demetrius Johnson in exactly the same way. But I can't remember him now. But I saw one the other day that was pretty good too. Getting them out of clinches. I think basically because in the old days it was throw punches and then grab the double collar tie around people's arms, which is not even strong clinch position to start. But you're seeing guys transition into it or out of it from clinches more. I think with your back to the fence is almost a better time to get it a lot of the time. But those long clinch positions, you got to be comfortable enough that you can do that without worrying about giving, because overhooks and underhooks are like close and strong and you know what you're doing. In the long clinch positions, you're also giving the guy the chance to swing back. You're giving him room to sort of move around wildly. And if your elbow slips, he can have an underhook and stuff. So there's a degree of risk there too. I've seen enough guys reach for a double collar tie and get chinned. Both Max and Volk were reaching for Topuria's head when they got knocked out. I'm not saying they shouldn't have been. I'm not saying they were doing a bad thing. Max, I think it hit him with a knee and then tried to grab the head afterwards. But you are going into the zombie mode momentarily. Even if you try and tuck your shoulders up, you're still reaching out there and there's going to be openings. So getting it from existing clinches is probably the best idea. But then from existing clinches, you're either the guy who wants the takedown or the guy who wants to get away. So you're probably not going to linger trying to land knees, which I think is probably where that problem of striking in the clinch not being very commonplace in MMA or very well explored in MMA comes from. Kawi asks, why do people think fighting has evolved so much? I think because it has. I mean, it's hard not to watch early UFCs and then modern UFCs and realize that everyone now is much better than they were then. But then there's also this tendency to use that to believe that you can't learn anything from the past. Please, I'm just a small bean, says, who is the queen of WMMA and why is it Macy Barber? And who of the top 15 KOs max at 155? I don't even know what the 155 top 15 looks like, and I'm not going to bother checking. Eurochris asks, where does Jack Shaw go from here? I still think he has potential, but it seems like his ceiling is getting a bit lower each time. I think back to bantamweight would be my first suggestion. He did throw a couple of punches actually in that Zalal fight where he looked like he was trying to hurt Zalal, but his striking toolkit seems very limited, and his wrestling seems to have hit a wall. It's not like we were calling him Welsh GSP for a while, but it's not like he's just running through guys. And obviously GSP was strong in clinches and he was strong in chain wrestling and he was, forcing that wrestling on people who were trying to defend it. But a good deal of GSP's success came from timing shots really well and just running through people. Because, in wrestling it's the same. If you time a shot really well, you've got a much better chance of finishing it than if you want to grind through a bad shot. But it is noticeable that Shaw's, even by trying to rely on the jab and the inside low kick and stuff, it's not the same threat that GSP's was. GSP had people panicking about his jab. And if you can't do that, the openings aren't going to happen in the same way. Though I've just been watching a load of Randy Couture, and I've got to say, I watched some of his early UFC fights. The one against Randleman's a great example. They were talking about his boxing in the army and stuff later on in his career, but that is not what made him a better striker. He is terrified against some of these guys. He's closing his eyes, turning away and stuff, and he forces himself through training to get comfortable under fire, as we always say. But he does a load of stuff where he's inside low kick and then inside low kick to overhand, and that's how he stunned Pedro Hizzo with that. I think he also caught Rico Rodriguez with that. He knocked down Tim Sylvia in the first round with that. But the other one he does is jab and move his head. So he jabs and he moves his head and then he throws two more punches. And then he gets the opponent coming back at him. And so when he jabs and moves his head, the opponent throws back and he throws like a left hook to the body or whatever, and that becomes an underhook. So he's getting these good positions on people that they would otherwise be terrified of giving him. Everyone's goal against Randy Couture coming in is do not get clinched up, do not give him underhooks, do not let him take you down. But by inviting the striking, by striking and standing close enough that they can throw back, giving them a fair shot, let's be honest, but moving his head, he's creating openings for himself. And I just think that's the epitome of what a grappler needs to do in MMA and why so many of them just don't get any better. You've got guys like Jacare, one of the most talented grapplers ever, just diving on low singles because he can't set things up. Trop says, do you think the new rules will affect the way people fight at all? They seem largely cosmetic to me. 12 to 6 elbows came in, and knees to a not grounded opponent, but an opponent with hands on the mat came in at the last event. There was one good knee with the hands on the mat from Jack Shaw against Yusuf Zalal, and there was a downward elbow that caused a cut from, was it Cody Gibson? But I saw a few guys try downward elbows, sort of for the novelty of it. Victor Henry was looking for a couple, but he was doing it from a position where he basically couldn't get anything but the back of their neck and the spine. And so he gave up on those. Who else did I see doing them? There are a couple of people who did them and ended up hitting illegal areas because they're just not well, it's a really powerful strike, but it does also, there's not that many positions you can land it because there's not that many positions where you've got separation from the opponent and they're looking up at the ceiling. So a lot of the time you're risking hitting the back of the head and the spine and stuff, which is still illegal. I think if anything, the downward elbow rule will just make people ignore blatantly illegal shots more. Refs have always been looking for an excuse not to call the back of the head. Oh, Jasmine Jasudavicius did a load of back of the head shots, but luckily they didn't look like they hurt much. But I do think the knee on the floor one, I don't think it's something people will exploit a lot. I think it's just something that will give a bit more clarity. Because you can't make someone put their hands on the mat and not put their knees down. If they want to put a knee down, they can still put a knee down. It's their choice. But you do remove their chance to play the stupid game, which is all we really wanted. I mean, not what we really wanted. What I really want is the return of knees on the mat, but it's all we realistically wanted. So I don't think you're going to see an awful lot of change. Basically, the absence of stupid point deductions and so on for hands on the mat, not seeing those anymore will be the positive change. So we might not even ever talk about it again. Your boy asks, was there actually anything good this past weekend? I'm afraid not. Actually, no, Henry versus... I listed about 3 fights that were good from this card, but if you missed them, you didn't miss an awful lot. Crafty asks, what's the deal with Canadian MMA? Oh, it's fucked, mate. It's cooked. There's nothing left in Canadian MMA. There is only my girl, Gillian Robertson. Oh, there's some more good questions here, actually. I'll probably do them on the Patreon. But I reckon we've gone far enough today. The number of questions are made up for the terrible fights. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. Sign up to the Patreon, get in on all the extra stuff, and be a boy. Read everything I write at thefightprimer.com. Check out the Linton Vassal study on the YouTube. And send your emails to the podcast at jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. Rose Namajunas getting back to a proper coach. Bless.